Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Run Cape Town podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Hutton, and I'm joined by Coach Ntutu Letseka. We are both running coaches at CoachParry.com. Today, we are in episode 8 of the current podcast series. We are 7 weeks out from race date on the 19th of October. If you have been listening in and you need a little bit of guidance in your training, to prepare you for the marathon, then you're welcome to have a look in our description box below. We have the links to our training plans for runners of all abilities. Today, we will be discussing pacing and sort of a run walk strategy, and we'll just touch briefly on navigating the water stations that we didn't really discuss in depth last week. And then we'll also be discussing a little bit about injury prevention. But before we get into that, and Tutu, how are you and how has your training been going?
Oh, hi, Jamie, and it's great to be back. It's a wet week this week up here. It's been quite interesting after a very, very hot beginning of the summer in July. It's been nice and cool, and training was going super, super well. And then we had another little round of heat where it got back up into the 30s again. And it's always interesting that when you're training, we always measure ourselves obviously by our daily performances, but when the weather is changing like that, where it's going from hot to cold, you find that your performance varies from day to day. And it's quite interesting that I was on a very, very good trajectory, and then 2 weeks ago, everything just grinds to a halt. You slow down, everything feels like work, and you just have to remember at the back of your mind that it's not you, that you cannot change the world around you, and that if it gets hot, you have to slow down. And then
Yeah.
now this week, it's cooler again. And this past week, I've just had some exceptional runs, and I'm back where I want to be. I'm obviously, I think I've mentioned, I'm training for a 10K in November. It's actually my birthday present to myself, but that's like for later. So still building up. But yeah, it's been going really well, and I'm enjoying the training process as always. And it's just at this point in time, it's just about doing some work and getting ready to do the hard training later. And for you
Yes.
on your end, I know you obviously ran your half marathon. Have you been back in training?
Yes. So, gosh, we still mention that half marathon. It feels like it was a while ago now, but I will wear the medal with pride as it was my first one. But for me, my training has actually not been as perfect training schedule at the moment. I've been traveling recently and I am still traveling. So hence why my background changes quite often if you have been watching the series. But no, my training, I'm actually enjoying where I am at the moment, trying to sightsee as much as I can. So the steps are up. Definitely getting my daily movement in, but the running is not as it was before my race. And with that, I am finding that discovering new places, sort of like a run walk, is a really nice way to do that, especially early in the morning before the tourists are out. Taking a run walk around the area is really nice, and you can, of course, get your distance in as well. Do quite a nice loop to see a whole bunch of new places when you go out nice and slow. But
And I think it's one of those things that we say with when you're traveling is don't put pressure on yourself. You should really go out and enjoy your holiday. And if you do find time to train, you should. But I think the key thing is that as you're enjoying where you are, you're seeing new places, you are getting some movement in.
yes.
But running can take a backseat for a little bit until you're back home in familiar environments where you can now control and be able to train more.
No, you're completely correct. I mean, believe it or not, I am not a professional runner. So I am taking the time to enjoy myself and yeah, just enjoying where I am. But speaking of today's topic, as mentioned, we are now 7 weeks out from race date, and it's starting to get light in the mornings in Cape Town. It's at least light by 7 a.m. So as we get closer to race date, we've spoken about having a plan, as the marathon distance is a long race. You can't exactly wing it. But we were speaking about pacing and a run walk strategy. What would you like to add on that, Tutu?
So, as you said there, Jamie, we are 7 weeks out from race day. And I think at this point, we've got to start thinking about how you're going to execute on race day. We're not making tight plans, but I think you need to start thinking about how to approach the marathon distance. And I think this is one of those things that people can really work on, and it is a teachable and learnable skill. that you can actually have a proper race plan and go out there and be able to execute well in the day. And that will go a long way to ensuring that you actually have a good race. We often see people struggling in the last 10Ks of a marathon, and you'll see people maintaining a nice even effort or pace, and then they get to the last 10Ks and they start walking, and it gets very, very difficult. And part of it is that the race is long and a lot more. When things go wrong in a marathon, it does kind of like, it's an elongated period that you're going to be struggling. Unlike a 10K where it's maybe 2Ks at the end, this might be 10 kilometers where you have to work a bit harder. But a lot of that can be fixed if you have a really good pacing strategy from the get-go. And I think this is where a lot of people struggle with this part. They don't believe that it's possible to execute, and I'll explain what I mean by executing a good marathon strategy. So you often hear about people wanting to bank time. And it's a very frustrating thing to hear people talk about. They say, oh, if you're trying to run a sub 4 hour marathon, can I not go out and run the first half in an hour and 50 and save myself those 10 minutes? And then I can go out and do 2 hours, 10 minutes for the second half, and I give myself a bit of breathing room. But it doesn't work like that. The more time you bank, you are now introducing a lot more fatigue. You are running harder than you should be. So your muscles, remember all that eccentric loading from the impact forces from running, you are hurting your muscles. But most importantly, you are burning through your fuel resources. We mentioned in the last episode on nutrition that your fuel resources are limited. Your body can only store about 500 grams of muscle glycogen. So the faster you run, the quicker you burn through those glycogen stores. And yes, you are taking in obviously gels and sports drink and food, but you're not absorbing everything immediately. So that's still going to take time to get into your gut and be delivered to your muscles. And as you work harder and harder and harder, you're building up, waste products. You are using up all that fuel and you're damaging your muscles. So then when you get to 30Ks, you are now spent. And all of that energy that you've wasted running harder in the beginning now comes back to fruition. And what people find is that you don't just lose 20 minutes in the second half. If you go out and run 10 minutes faster or going for a sub 4, you might come back in 4.5 hours. Because now you go from running 6 minutes a K to walking 10 minutes a K because you're tired. So it really is something that you've got to be very, very aware of. And I think if you start thinking about that now, we spoke about like choosing your plan. So we said you can use your 5K times, your 10K times. If you run a half, that's good. You can use those times. And, you can use a calculator online. We can talk about that in future episodes, how you actually choose the exact time you want to do. But I mean, just to give you an example, you could say you want to run, if you're running a 4-hour marathon, you can use your 5K times. And I think it might be something like a 25-minute 5K is equivalent to a 4-hour marathon. So, and whatever it is, when you use the calculator will tell you what that is, and then you can begin to start developing a strategy. So what does it actually look like? And this is the part that people refuse to believe is possible, that the best way to run a marathon is to run an even or negative split. Of course, that's route dependent.
Yes.
If the route is more hilly in the second half, you will be slower in the second half. But that's where you've got to take into account the route. But for the most part, in a race that has sort of generally even undulation throughout, or like a perfectly flat race. Cape Town is not perfectly flat, but it is a very even route throughout the 42.2 Ks. So for most races, you can actually execute a good even to negative split strategy. What that means is that you're going to run the second half of your race faster than the first half. And how you do that is by doing the bit that people don't want to do, is starting your race slower.
Yeah.
And when you start in the beginning, if your goal pace, so for a 4-hour marathon, your goal pace is about 5 minutes 51 per kilometer. It means you'll actually be starting your race closer to 6 minutes a K in the beginning. And what I always say to people is, for like a busy race like Cape Town, actually use the fact that it's a little bit busy at the start to hold you back a bit. So of course you're going to find that it might be a bit slow going. Don't waste energy trying to zigzag your way through the crowds. Allow the crowd to thin properly. And then once you get moving, you can then dial in your pacing strategy. So what we want to do is we want to see people starting slower than goal race pace. And it's not like an insane amount. Like I always say, aim for about 5 to 10 seconds per K slower than what you want to do, and allow yourself to build up to where you want to be. The one thing about marathon pace is that unlike a 5K or a 10K, which are done above sort of threshold pace and they're close to that maximum intensity, the marathon is actually relatively slow. Compared to a 5K or a 10K. It's not slow. You're not doing an easy run. It is a moderate intensity, but it's a kind of intensity that when you're tapered and you have had the 2 weeks or 3 weeks and you're coming into the race fresh, people are often surprised how this pace feels so comfortable in the beginning. And then it's tempting to say, oh, okay, 550 feels easy. I can run 545 a K. I can run 540 a K. But we're not worried about the first 10 Ks. We're worried about how you're going to be feeling at 35 Ks. So I think that's the sort of critical and important thing. And so I think part of it is just having that patience to say, I'm not going to go out too fast, and don't believe your body when it says, this is so easy, you can go out a little bit quicker. Remember that you're working on a 42K race. You're running for 4 hours, 4.5 hours, or whatever it is that your goal is. So that's very, very important. So that's the first sort of, in the beginning, what I always say to people, once you sort of give yourself even 5 to 10 Ks to build up to your goal pace, and then what you want to do is you want to settle. And the longer you can hold that, so if your goal pace is 550 a K, the longer you can sit at that 550 per K mark as long as possible and as deep into the race as you can go, it'll give you, and then with that easy beginning, when you get to sort of like 35 Ks, if you've paced this really well, people are surprised that they can actually push on, and they can actually then start running a little bit quicker in those last 5 to 7 Ks. And then you actually then pull back that time that you think you lost in the beginning, but you are sparing yourself, you are protecting yourself. And I always think of that notion that you are protecting yourself, you are protecting your muscles from damage, you're protecting your precious fuel from being depleted. So that at the end of the race, you can tap into all your resources. And now there's nothing left. 7 Ks to go. But I don't care if I break myself in the last 7 Ks. You can go out as hard as you can. And then you'd be surprised that you can actually pull back all that time and end up running a negative split. It's a very, very possible thing that people don't believe is possible.
I must say, though, it does sound strange, especially if it's your first marathon, to head out at a pace slightly slow. It would definitely make me nervous, but at least we have. And I must reiterate, a 2:51 marathon runner over here saying it himself, not just an experienced coach, but what you're saying makes perfect sense. So there is also proof in the pudding with that. And speaking of sort of pacing strategies, it is also a plan that you can have, and we definitely take into consideration the marathon route, all of that, the elevation changes as you go in those pacing strategies. But in Tutu, what would you advise if someone is maybe heading out a little bit too fast? Is walking a possibility? Some people maybe take a walk break. What are your thoughts on that?
So again, another thing that when you talk about walk breaks, people see walking as a negative thing, that you're going to be, again, losing time. But again, it's this idea that when people do implement a run walk strategy and they do it well, again, that walk part, it's not like a slow, chill walk. It's purposeful walking. So you try and maintain some momentum with your run, but again, if you think about what I said before about like protecting your muscles, your fuel, when you're taking those walk breaks, you are giving your body a break from the hard impact. You are slowing down, then reducing the intensity a little bit and giving your body a little bit of a break. So those walk breaks are actually a good way to, I always talk about proportioning your resources in your run time. It extends how much time you have available to utilize those resources. And what's important with the run walk strategy is that you don't wait until you're tired. So you don't run 30 Ks and then you are spent and then start walking. At that point, the momentum is gone and you'll find yourself walking every 30 seconds. You do this from the beginning. The same way that we spoke about nutrition, where you have your time that you take your jowls, your intervals, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. The same thing with your walking. So I know some of the coaches here at Coach Perry work on a 9-minute, 1-minute strategy. 14 to 1 is another one that you can do. That means you run 9 minutes, walk a minute, or you walk 14 minutes, or you walk 1 minute. Or you can do, there's various different things. You can do it by distance. You can say every 5 Ks, you will walk 30 seconds at the end of it. And again, it's purposeful walking. You don't stop and sit down and chill. You keep moving, but you're just taking a little bit of a break and giving yourself a little bit of a breather. Almost like how when you do an interval session, you might do a recovery interval in between. Those intervals don't break up the momentum. They allow you to do more work in the session. These walk breaks will allow you to maintain your effort and intensity consistently throughout. And I think we can sort of circle back here. We're touching back on fuel. You see a lot of these things will feed back into each other. We can't separate all of these concepts. But the water stations, I
Yes.
find, can be a very, very useful avenue for people who are doing a run walk strategy. And we've said before that at Cape Town, the water station is every 3 kilometers. So
Yeah.
again, you can figure out based on your running pace, if you're running a 6 minutes a K for your marathon, that's for a 4:12 marathon, that's every 18 minutes you might go through a water station. So you could almost say like maybe that's your walk strategy. You will run 18 minutes and then walk
Yeah.
30 seconds. And that 30 seconds can be walking through the water station if you want to pick up some water. And some of the challenges with fueling at a water station is like, if you have cups,
Yeah.
difficult to pick up a cup and run, on the way through. So this might be an easy way for you to just slow down a bit, bring things down, pick up what you need, take what you need, throw away when you're finished, and then get going. And it
Yeah.
might reduce the pressure of trying to fuel very quickly on the go.
Yeah.
But you must also be careful about water stations because they are time sinks.
Yeah.
That is one place where if you spend too long at a water station, you don't want to. What I always say is when you're approaching the water station, scan where it is, what side of the road are you on, make sure you move to that side of the road, and then almost eyeball the person you want to be getting something from. So look ahead, pick your person, and then avoid everything else. Avoid people and go to where you need to go, pick up what you need, and then move out of the traffic and then
Yeah.
keep going. So it's a good way to calm things down. But if you're
Yeah.
not careful about it, that is actually where you can lose time. And then if you lose 30 seconds at every water station and you stop five
Yeah.
times, that's like 2.5 minutes gone.
Yeah.
So it's you must just be very, very careful about how you navigate that. But they can be useful ways for you to manage that intensity part of things. And with this thing, you should be practicing this. We mentioned this before, that you should be practicing these things. So if you are going to be using water stations and using those run walk strategies, make sure you're getting used to it. Because if you do start walking in a race and you've not done it before, it can be a bit jarring to the system. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with. And I know that we're doing it at long run pace, not at race pace, but these things are transferable.
Yeah.
So the pattern becomes ingrained, and all you're doing is changing the intensity in between those walk breaks. So it is definitely something you can do.
Yeah.
But overall, I think the pacing aspect of it, and I think this is why I want people to think about it right now, is that this is one area of your race where you can, like, I wouldn't say make or break, but you can make huge strides here. If you get this part right, have a good plan and stick with it, you can find
Yes.
yourself having a very, very strong race and getting to the end and feeling strong and like passing people and not having, those heavy legs and feeling like you've
Yeah.
hit the wall at the end, because it is actually possible to get that right.
No, completely. I think, a very, very common combination towards the end of these long distance races is a combination of your fueling and your pacing strategy. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, now it's really difficult to separate concepts, not only when we're talking about it, but when we're also trying to isolate. Maybe someone had a bad running experience, or towards the end of their marathon, they felt like they sort of lost stamina or something like that. Then
Yeah.
looking at a combination of those two,
Yeah.
spoke about nutrition last week, but then pacing goes hand in hand with that this
Yeah.
week. So something that is maybe slightly unrelated to the two of them, or maybe it is more related. In some of our listeners, they might currently be struggling with an injury of some sort. I know runners are sort of stereotyped to have bad knees, or hips that make funny sounds when you move your leg out to the side, things like that. So I guess I want to say it is just a stereotype. Not all runners are injured, and you're not going to necessarily get injured if you run. But
Yeah.
speaking of marathon training, we are increasing volumes. We're spending long time or long durations on the legs. And as we have reiterated throughout this podcast series, a lot of people might be doing this for the first time and rapidly increasing. It might be your first marathon training block, for example. So with injury prevention, maybe we can just chat about that. I know that, we can't say do this, this, and this, and you won't get injured
Yeah.
because I don't know, you might decide to play rugby in the garden on Sunday, and
Yeah.
we can't guarantee you might not have a contact injury from that.
Yeah.
But sort of the non-contact side of things, if we can just touch on that.
So unfortunately, injuries are part of any sport. And what we're doing is we're not eliminating injury risk. We can't. And we can't promise you that we will remove all risk of injury, but we can mitigate the risk of injury with good strategies and doing the right things in training and that sort of thing, and other supplementary stuff that we can do to protect
Yeah.
ourselves. The World Championships are coming up now, I think, in September. And one of the saddest things about this time of the year is when you see a lot of athletes posting on social media about having to miss champs because they've picked up an injury. So, we know from the pro side of things that people do get injured. I mean, to be fair, they are at the limit of like they're pushing their bodies as hard as they can.
Yeah.
But which actually makes it even more important for us because we have a lot of stuff going on around our lives. That, like you said, you're running, but maybe you go and visit family and you're playing with like nephews or whatever, and then one of the kids doesn't realize and tackles you hard playing rugby, then gosh, you're injured. But from a running perspective, from a training perspective, there are running errors that we tend to make that we can, again, this is about mitigation, where we can use the training plan becomes the template that we can use to control the training load, which is actually the biggest risk that we have. So my dad used to always talk to me about what did he say? Too much, too fast, too soon. That's
Yeah,
often
it's a good
the
one.
biggest issue is that we do too much, most of it too fast, and we often do it sooner than our bodies adapted to doing it. There've been a lot of studies that have been done about injury risk, and they have they can do the different ratios and stuff. And I know all that stuff is not completely 100% predictive, but one of the things that is risky for training is that you can if you do too much in a session, like an individual session, you do too much, that is a huge risk of injury. If you increase weekly volume too much in one go, that is a risk for injury. And the intensity, if you are doing interval training and we've set you an intensity and you go out and you do sprints, instead of running at like the correct intensity, you are increasing the training load more than you are able to handle, and that results in you getting injured. So we just need to be very, very careful about those very, very controllable errors. Trying not to increase volume in
Yeah.
individual sessions in a more sort of acute phase like a week, and managing intensity. The biggest thing is that people are worried they're not doing enough long runs. So people end up going out and doing a long run, and their mate is doing 40K long runs. And so they're going to do a 40K long run or whatever it is. And then they just increase that long run exponentially. They don't then take a rest and account for that. And that chronic fatigue builds up, and then they get injured. So that's the very critical thing about training errors you can make. The other thing is ignoring fatigue and soreness. If you are getting sore and getting fatigued, please don't ignore it. There is a small amount of fatigue you can tolerate and a little bit of soreness. If you do a new session, you get a little bit stiff, you get DOMS. But if your running mechanics change, if you cannot sleep properly, if you are sore at night, if you're sore when you wake up, take points to address this. And if you need to see a physio or go get a massage, please implement those things. And it's often safer to reduce training volume now than to try and push through. And then
Yeah.
when you push through, you get hurt. So those are sort of the areas that become problematic. And then we talk about prevention and mitigation. So again, we touched on this. If you are doing things too fast, the key thing is to stick to your paces. Your training plan is there to guide you, and also listen to your body, of course. But your training
Yeah.
plan is there, and when you've been given training paces and intensities, keep your long runs easy. Your interval sessions are not meant to be 10 out of 10 efforts every single time, so keep those at the level that they need to be. And if you control that, you're going to find yourself able to then go and do the next session, recover properly, and then not get hurt. And then, of course, don't obsess with what other people are doing. You don't know what I'm doing. So if I'm going out and I'm doing, I don't know, like I've gone out and I've done a 35K run this weekend, you don't know my training history. You don't know what I've done in not just in this session. What was I doing 6 months before? I might have been building up for years in training, and I've built up the capacity to be able to do that. So don't just look at my plan or look at whoever's plan and say I'm going to do what they're doing because they've run a good marathon recently or because they look like they know what they're doing. That person is doing something tailored to them and they're responding as their body needs. So just remember that. And if your coach in particular has given you a training plan, please don't go and do what someone else is doing.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to go into too detail about this because we have actually done a whole podcast on this, strength training. Your running challenges your body in unique ways. And yes, running itself, you adapt to the running on its own. But for a lot of us who are not professional athletes and who don't have maybe a long history of training, strengthening your body using resistance training is the best way to ensure that when you do maybe push a little bit harder, your body can handle the stress that is being put under. And it's a very, very critical part of it. And like I said, strength training is non-negotiable. 2 sessions a week. 2 is better than 1 and 1 is better than none. But just do something and work to protect yourself from that aspect where you can actually build strong muscles and build injury resistance and allow you to be able to handle the training. And then lastly, recovery. I think a lot of people don't factor in recovery. And again, you want to keep training because you think the more you train, the better you get, but your body improves and adapts during periods of recovery. So respect the rest days, respect the recovery weeks, and ensure that you are doing all the right things around nutrition, trying to get enough sleep, and all that aspect of it. So if you tie all those things together, you're going to go some way to ensuring that you don't get injured. And then if you do get injured, well, what we don't want is to have you injured and miss valuable training time, because that can be, and we don't want to stress about missing a day or 2 in training, but you don't want to have a period where you're missing 2 weeks of training, especially now, this close to marathon days. So do all the right things and you're going to mitigate and hopefully go some way to ensuring that that risk of injury is reduced enough where you can train through the full training cycle and get the most out of your training plan.
No, completely. I think listening to everything, it is quite easy to feel overwhelmed that there are all these different things that we need to remember. But firstly, this is a recorded podcast. You can pause us and rewind and listen again. So don't feel like you need to take everything in at once. But it is just, as you said, important. And I know we have spoken of this before. We are unfortunately not a machine. Our bodies are not machines. They're complex, physiological beings. But just focusing on the controllables. So managing your sleep, looking at your nutrition, as we spoke about last week, and then your strength training. If you are unfamiliar with strength training, don't need to be going to the gym 6 days a week and have a personal trainer and a severe workout split, all of these things. Just 2 strength sessions a week, maybe 3 if you'd like, focusing on your important, running. I always like to say the big running engines, your glutes, your hamstrings, your core, the lower body particular, and of course you're welcome to build in the upper body if you're getting ready for summer in Cape Town. But with injury prevention as well, as we mentioned, or as I said, the controllables. If you are getting closer to race date, it might not be the best idea to go and try new things physically. I know that our Faster Beyond 50 and Comrades podcast have spoken about, the weekend before the race, maybe not the best idea to try a new sport and just increase the risk for those things to happen. You might have to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer at the family lunch on Sunday, maybe not playing rugby in the garden, but, just closer to race date, just have this in the back of your mind, focusing on those controllables. I'm not sure, Ntutu, if you'd recommend trying anything new just before race date.
Oh God, not even in the 8 weeks before.
No, definitely not. So yeah, just rehashing those, as mentioned, if you need to pause and rewind this, feeling like there's a lot to take in, then just focus on those controllables. So just before we end off in Tutu, just wanted to quickly touch it again. You mentioned sort of avoiding those super, super long runs, maybe feeling a bit of peer pressure, seeing what other people are getting in terms of mileage. Just reiterating that we shouldn't be jumping up in those long runs as the programs are building now between recovery weeks, we shouldn't be jumping in volumes. Sort of we've spoken about that 10% rule, jumping in volumes from long run to long run each week.
Yeah, so pretty much that you do need to increase that run length, but we need to do it in the context of that it's going to be something that your body can handle. And going from 2 hours to 3 hours is like your body cannot. And I can't remember what there was a recent study that actually showed what the tolerable percentage is. That there is a certain point when if one run is increased something like 30 or 40% longer than it was before, that vastly increases your risk of injury, and particularly when you're already running long. Those long runs are already putting a hefty dose on your body. So if you now go from like 2.5 hours and add an hour in one go, you can do it gradually over 3 or 4 weeks with the recovery. But if you now just jump up all of a sudden, you are increasing loading forces, you are increasing muscle damage, and your body has not had time to adapt and prepare. Because remember, your body is exposed to a stress, then repairs itself and makes itself stronger, and then does the same thing over and over. But if the stress load is too much, it actually breaks down to the point where it can't repair itself, and that's when injury strikes.
Yes.
So, and remember that long run is important, but it's not about just going out and getting in a 3.5 hour long run if you can't do the rest of the training.
Yeah.
So we always have to think about a balanced training plan that allows you to increase your long runs and your interval sessions, but you're able to still keep training. If you have to take 4 days off after every long run, then you're not getting enough consistency.
Yeah.
So the long run should never be done at the expense of a consistent training plan, because that's what builds your capacity over 12 weeks, or however long your training plan is.
Yes, I think it's good to remember that everything has a cost, as a good summary for everything that we've actually really been speaking about. But with that in tutu, I think next week we'll be chatting a little bit more on I don't want to say gear now, equipment. If you have been listening to our previous podcasts. But with that, I will chat to you next week in tutu. Thank you for all of the important bits today.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jamie, and look forward to chatting next week.
We'll see you next week. Good luck for all of the runners that might be running on Sunday. And if you are currently out on the roads, maybe you're listening to us on your long run, hope that it's going well. And remember, when you get home, focusing on the good nutrition, or actually throughout your run, and having good night's rest tonight. Cheers.